when two fake cops showed up to arrest a quiet homeowner over HOA violations. They didn't know he was the chief of police, and the whole thing was caught on camera. The knock wasn't loud, just 3 steady taps, but something about it made Gregory Harlan pause mid-step. He had a pot of coffee brewing and a half-folded newspaper on the kitchen counter. Saturday mornings were his reset time, the one part of the week that felt truly quiet. But those knocks, they had weight to them. He walked to the door, glanced through the peephole, and froze. 2 men stood on his porch wearing navy uniforms with silver badges that caught the light. The one on the left, taller and clean-cut, had a clipboard tucked under his arm. The other stood with his hand on his belt, thumb brushing over a holstered gun. "Mr. Harlan," the tall one called out, "we have a warrant for your arrest." Gregory didn't move right away. Years in law enforcement had taught him that real authority never needed to shout. But something about their tone was off. Flat, rehearsed, like 2 actors reading from a script. He cracked the door open halfway. "Can I see your IDs?" The taller man's expression didn't change. "We'll explain everything once you're in custody, sir. It's about a city code violation." Gregory blinked. A city code violation? For what? He had paid every fine, responded to every notice. The only conflict in his life lately had been with the HOA, the same people who sent letters about his mailbox paint and his truck being too visible. Still calm, he asked again. "Which department are you with?" The second man spoke this time, his voice rough, impatient. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Step outside." Gregory tilted his head slightly. The patches on their sleeves said Metro Enforcement Division, a name he'd never heard in all his 22 years on the force. The badge numbers didn't look right either, both ending in zeros. Perfectly symmetrical. Amateur mistake. "Give me 1 second," he said evenly, then closed the door without waiting for their response. Inside, he took a slow breath. His heartbeat was steady. He reached for his phone and tapped a contact labeled Dispatch Priority. "This is Chief Harlan. I have 2 males at my residence claiming to be law enforcement. Check for any warrants under my name immediately," he said quietly. The dispatcher's voice came back confused. "Chief, there's nothing. You want backup?" "Send units." No sirens. He hung up and walked back toward the door. The men were still there, glancing around like they were deciding whether to break in. Gregory opened the door again, wider this time. "Gentlemen," he said calmly, "I asked for identification." The taller man sighed, flashing a wallet badge so fast it could have been from a movie prop set. Gregory didn't even bother hiding his smirk. "You said you're with the Metro Enforcement Division?" "That's right." "Interesting," Gregory replied, "because there's no such department in this county." The shorter one stepped forward. "Sir, are you resisting?" Gregory's eyes hardened. "No, I'm waiting." Just then, the faint rumble of engines echoed from down the street. 3 black SUVs rolled in, silent. No sirens, no lights, just authority arriving with quiet precision. The fake officers stiffened, realizing too late what was happening. One of the SUVs stopped right behind Gregory's driveway. Real officers stepped out, hands on holsters. Within seconds, both imposters were on their knees, their fake badges glinting uselessly on the pavement. From the porch, Gregory watched it all without raising his voice. "You came to arrest me," he said softly, "but you didn't even check who I was." The taller man tried to stammer an excuse. "We were told—" "By who?" Gregory cut him off. His tone stayed controlled, but his words carried steel. The man swallowed hard and looked away. When the last SUV door shut and the situation was under control, Gregory turned and looked down the street. Neighbors were peeking through blinds, watching. He could already imagine Sandra Whitmore, the HOA president, pretending she had nothing to do with this. But he knew better. The morning air felt heavier now, not because of fear, but clarity. Someone had gone too far. Whoever had pulled the strings behind this stunt had just made the biggest mistake of their life. But before Gregory made a single call, he wanted to understand why. Who would risk sending fake cops to his door? And what did they really think they'd find once he opened it? He wasn't looking for allies. He just wanted peace. As he reached the door, Sandra's voice stopped him. "Mr. Harlan, you may think you've won tonight," she said coldly, "but this community won't tolerate arrogance forever." He turned slightly, met her eyes, and said calmly, "Neither will justice." Then he walked out. Outside, the air felt heavy and cool. Street lights flickered over the parked cars. Harold caught up to him again, muttering, "You hit a nerve in there." "Yeah," Gregory replied, "and people like Sandra don't forget when you do." He looked back toward the building's glass doors, where Sandra stood glaring through the reflection. Her expression wasn't just angry, it was calculating. That was when Gregory realized this wasn't about the HOA anymore. It was personal now, and people who take things personally often do reckless things. But Gregory didn't know just how reckless Sandra was willing to get, or how far she'd go to prove a point she should have never tried to make. The day after that meeting, Sandra Whitmore's composure cracked. In her mind, Gregory Harlan had humiliated her in front of her board, her neighbors, and worst of all, the people she wanted to impress. Control was everything to her, and Gregory had taken it away with one calm sentence. By noon the next day, she was sitting in her kitchen surrounded by HOA papers, her laptop open, and a half-finished glass of white wine sweating beside it. She kept replaying his words in her head. The HOA isn't above the law. The way he'd said it, confident and unbothered, had lit a fire she couldn't put out. Her friend and fellow board member Lydia Brent stopped by unannounced. She leaned against the counter, sipping her coffee nervously. "Sandra, maybe it's time to let this go." "He's right. Technically, we don't have any standing to fine him again." Sandra glared at her. "You think I don't know that? The man's mocking us." "Mocking me?" Lydia shifted her weight. "He's not mocking you. He just— Don't defend him!" Sandra snapped. "Do you realize what happens if we let this slide? Everyone else will start doing whatever they want. We'll have junk cars, broken fences, God knows what else. But this isn't about the neighborhood anymore, is it?" Lydia asked quietly. Sandra slammed her glass down hard enough to spill the wine. "He thinks he can embarrass me. I'll show him what happens when you disrespect authority." Those words hung in the air longer than they should have. Lydia left not long after, shaking her head. That evening, Sandra made 2 phone calls. One to Rick Danvers, a former security contractor who had done small private enforcement jobs for the HOA before. Mostly harmless tasks like towing cars and warning fence violators. The other call was to Eddie Colbin, Rick's partner, a man with a criminal record that Sandra conveniently ignored. The meeting took place at a small diner off Highway 278, just outside town. The place smelled like grease and old coffee, with neon lights flickering against the windows. Sandra sat in the booth with her neatly folded HOA binder beside her. Rick arrived first, mid-40s, muscular, tattooed arms barely covered by a short-sleeved shirt. Eddie came a few minutes later, chewing gum and looking bored. "You said this was about a job?" Rick asked. Sandra nodded. "A resident has repeatedly violated community standards. We've exhausted normal channels. I want to make sure he understands that our rules aren't optional." Rick raised an eyebrow. "You want us to rough him up?" "Of course not," she said quickly, glancing around the diner. "Just a visit. Something official looking. Maybe make him think it's law enforcement." Eddie grinned. "So scare him a little?" Sandra hesitated just long enough to confirm what she was really asking. "Exactly. He's been uncooperative. Maybe it's time he saw what noncompliance leads to." Rick leaned back. "We can do that. I've got old uniforms, badges, even a couple of fake citation forms. Looks official enough if you don't stare too close." Sandra lowered her voice. "Good. Do it next Saturday morning. He lives at the end of Maplewood Drive. I'll make sure he's home." Rick smirked. "What's the guy's name?" "Gregory Harlan." Eddie frowned. "Harlan. That name sounds familiar." Rick shrugged. "Probably just some retired cop." "Don't worry about it. Sandra's tone hardened. He's not a cop. He's a bully. A man who thinks the rules don't apply to him. They agreed on a price, a few $100s in cash. Sandra paid up front. As they left, she watched through the diner window as the two men laughed, shaking hands before heading to their truck. She felt a twisted sense of satisfaction rise in her chest. Finally, she thought, she was taking back control. That night, she sat on her porch with a glass of wine, staring down the street toward Gregory's house. The lights inside were on, his truck parked in the driveway, the flag swaying gently above it. "Enjoy your peace while it lasts," she whispered. Across the street, Harold watched her from his living room window. He'd seen her talking to strangers earlier that evening, and something didn't sit right. He couldn't hear what was said, but he recognized the look on her face. The same look she'd had after that meeting. Pride, anger, and something darker. He made a mental note to tell Gregory the next time he saw him, but Gregory had been called into work early that week. A case in a neighboring county had kept him late most nights, reviewing files and coordinating task forces. He was tired, focused, unaware that the people living just across the street were setting him up. The plan was already in motion. But what Sandra didn't realize was that the man she was targeting wasn't the type to break under pressure, and the uniform she was trying to use against him was one he wore better than anyone she'd ever meet. Saturday morning arrived soft and pale, with a thin layer of fog hugging the lawns on Maplewood Drive. Gregory was finally off duty for the weekend, his first full day at home in almost a week. He brewed his coffee, flipped on a jazz station, and sat at the kitchen table to read the paper. It was peaceful, calm, the kind of morning you wish could last forever. Then came the knock. 3 steady, deliberate taps. He didn't move at first. The rhythm was too precise, too calculated to be casual. He set his cup down, listened for a second knock, and there it was. 3 more, sharper this time. Gregory walked to the door, checked the peephole, and frowned. 2 men stood outside in full uniform, or at least what looked like it. Their badges caught the light just enough to seem real, but something about the way they carried themselves was wrong. Real officers have posture. These men had performance. The taller one, Rick Danvers, stood with a clipboard in hand, pretending to read from it. The shorter one, Eddie Colbin, had his hand resting too casually on his holster. Gregory opened the door halfway, keeping the chain latch in place. "Can I help you?" "Mr. Harlan," Rick said. "We have a warrant for your arrest. You've been charged with repeated violations of local property codes." Gregory raised an eyebrow. "City code violations?" "That's correct," Rick said confidently, though his eyes darted for a split second, the kind of flicker Gregory had seen in hundreds of interrogations. "Which department are you from?" Eddie answered this time, impatient. "Metro Enforcement Division, sir. You need to come with us." Gregory gave a small, measured smile. "Never heard of it," Eddie's jaw tightened. "You will once you're booked." Gregory tilted his head slightly. "You know, that's funny. I've worked with every department in this state and I've never once seen a badge like that." Rick shifted. "Sir, if you don't cooperate, we'll have to escalate." "Escalate?" Gregory repeated calmly. "Over a mailbox?" Neither man responded. The silence stretched, heavy and uncomfortable. Gregory's gaze dropped briefly to their boots, scuffed and mismatched. Rookie mistake. Then to the patrol car parked crookedly near his driveway. The license plate was covered with tape. He exhaled slowly through his nose. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice steady, "I'll need to verify your credentials before I go anywhere." Eddie smirked. "You think we're bluffing?" Gregory didn't answer. He closed the door halfway, pretending to grab something from a side table. In reality, his hand reached for the phone in his pocket. 1 tap. That was all it took to alert dispatch. Back outside, Rick called out, "You're making a mistake, Mr. Harlan." Gregory's voice came from behind the door. "So are you." A few moments later, the distant hum of engines broke the stillness. 3 black SUVs turned onto Maplewood Drive, moving in quiet synchronization. The fake officers glanced at each other, confused. Rick muttered, "What the hell?" Before they could react, The SUVs stopped at the curb. Real officers stepped out, armed, alert, and focused. Within seconds, commands filled the air. "Hands where we can see them." "Drop the clipboard!" Eddie raised his hands instantly, panic washing across his face. Rick tried to speak, but his words tumbled out in useless fragments. Gregory opened his front door slowly and stepped out. He didn't have to say a word. Every officer on that street knew who he was. Chief Gregory Harlan, head of Douglas County Police Department, standing calm in jeans and a t-shirt, watching as his men surrounded the imposters. The officers moved efficiently, handcuffing Rick and Eddie while verifying their fake credentials. One of them turned to Gregory. "Chief, you want us to handle this, or you want to make the call yourself?" Gregory folded his arms. "Handle it by the book." As the two men were escorted to the curb, Sandra Whitmore's silver SUV came creeping down the street. She slowed when she saw the flashing lights. Her eyes widened as she spotted Gregory standing beside uniformed officers. He looked directly at her. Didn't wave. Didn't speak. Just held her gaze, long enough for her to understand that whatever game she started was over. One of the officers approached Sandra's window. "Ma'am, can you step out of the vehicle?" She stammered. "What? What's this about?" Gregory's voice cut through the air, calm but commanding. "They said they had a warrant for my arrest. The paperwork came from someone in the HOA. Would you happen to know who authorized that?" Sandra froze. The color drained from her face. I don't know what you're talking about." Gregory's expression didn't change. "Then I'm sure the investigation will clear that up. We're here to discuss the recent impersonation incident and the ongoing investigation involving the Maplewood Estates Homeowners Association." Gregory listened as Rhonda presented her findings. Every detail documented, every statement verified. The imposters had confessed, the payments traced, and Sandra's text to Rick and Eddie read aloud for the record. Gasps echoed through the room as her own words filled the air. "Make sure he sees the badge. I want him to feel it." Sandra shrank in her seat. When it was Gregory's turn to speak, he stood slowly, buttoned his jacket, and walked to the microphone. The flash of cameras made the room hum with anticipation. "I've served in law enforcement for 22 years, he began. "I've seen people do a lot of wrong things for a lot of bad reasons. But what happened here wasn't just about me. It was about the idea that some people think they can decide who belongs and who doesn't." The room stayed silent. "I moved into that neighborhood because I believed in community," he continued. "Because I thought being part of something meant respect, not control. What happened wasn't just harassment, it was fear. Fear dressed up as authority." He paused, looking directly at Sandra. "But authority without accountability isn't strength. It's weakness hiding behind paperwork." A few people clapped quietly. Others just sat still, letting the weight of his words settle. After the meeting, reporters swarmed outside, shouting questions. "Chief Harlan, are you pressing charges personally? Do you plan to move? How do you feel about your neighbors now?" He gave one short answer. "I'm not moving. This is my home." That quote made the evening news. Within hours, it became a headline. "Police chief refuses to leave after HOA scandal. This is my home." It resonated far beyond Douglas County. News outlets across the country picked it up. Some saw it as a story about racism and arrogance. Others framed it as a debate about homeowners' rights. Gregory didn't care how they spun it. All he cared about was that the truth was finally visible, the quiet kind of truth that can't be ignored once it's seen. Days later, Harold came by again. "You know," he said, leaning on the porch railing, "people around here walk different now. It's like they're afraid to show who they really are." Gregory nodded. "Maybe that's a good start." "You think she'll ever face real punishment?" Harold asked. "She's already facing it," Gregory said. "She's living with what she did." That's a sentence all its own. That night, Gregory sat alone in his living room. The news on TV replayed clips of his speech, but he muted it. Through the window, he could see his flag swaying under the porch light, the same one Sandra tried to shame him for. It no longer represented just patriotism to him. It represented defiance in the quietest, most dignified form. He wasn't proud of what happened. but he was proud of how he handled it. And maybe, he thought, that was the real victory, not proving anyone wrong, but refusing to become what they wanted him to be. But while the story seemed to settle publicly, beneath the surface more secrets were about to surface, and not everyone who played a part in Sandra's plan was ready to face the consequences that were still coming. By the second week, the story had grown beyond anyone's control. It was no longer just a local scandal, it was national news. Major outlets like the Washington Post and USA Today picked up the story, running headlines about abuse of HOA power and police chief outsmarts fake cops sent by HOA president. News vans began parking at the edge of Maplewood Drive, and reporters stood in front of Sandra Whitmore's house every morning hoping for a sound bite. Gregory didn't like the attention. He never did. He wasn't chasing fame. He was trying to move past the noise, but the world had a way of turning real pain into public spectacle, and now strangers had opinions about his life. The department's PR team had advised him to make a short public statement. So one Friday morning, he stood at the podium of the Douglas County Police Department, cameras pointed straight at him, microphones cluttered in front of his face. "Good morning," he said, his voice steady. "I appreciate the support, but I want to make something clear. This isn't about me versus one person. It's about what happens when people let authority turn into entitlement." He paused, letting the words breathe. "My message is simple. If you lead people in any capacity, you owe them fairness, not fear. And if you make a mistake, own it. Don't hide behind excuses." It wasn't long, but it was powerful. That clip spread faster than any headline could. His composure, his tone calm, measured, not vengeful, struck a chord with people who had experienced the same kind of quiet discrimination. After the press conference, Gregory stepped outside to find a group of residents waiting. Some were from his neighborhood. Others had driven from nearby towns just to shake his hand. An older woman approached first, her voice trembling. "Chief Harlan, I just wanted to say thank you. What you did, it gave a lot of us courage." He smiled gently. "You don't need courage to be decent," he said. "You just need to remember what's right." Meanwhile, the investigation into Sandra's conduct had taken a new turn. Detective Stillwell discovered that the HOA funds had been mishandled. Records showed several unauthorized transactions, landscaping expenses that didn't exist, contractor fees with no invoices, and even payments made to a consultant that turned out to be one of Rick Danvers's shell accounts. When confronted, Sandra broke down during questioning. The woman who once ruled HOA meetings with icy confidence now sat in a small interrogation room, shoulders slumped. "I just wanted order," she whispered, voice cracking. "You don't understand what it's like trying to keep people in line." Stillwell looked at her, unimpressed. "Keeping people in line isn't your job. Treating them fairly is. You crossed that line, and you dragged others with you." Sandra buried her face in her hands. "I didn't think it would go this far." But it had, and now there was no walking it back. Later that week, Gregory received a call from the district attorney's office confirming the charges Sandra would face: counts of conspiracy, harassment, and impersonation through proxy. Rick and Eddie were charged separately and agreed to testify in exchange for lighter sentences. When the news broke, the community reaction split cleanly down the middle. Some believed she deserved prison time. Others said she had simply made a bad decision. But one thing was certain: her reputation was gone. The same neighbors who once applauded her strictness now treated her like a stain they couldn't scrub away fast enough. On Sunday morning, Gregory saw her for the first time since the incident. She was walking to her mailbox, dressed in sweatpants, her hair unkempt, head down. The woman who once smiled for control now barely looked up. Their eyes met briefly. She froze, unsure whether to speak. Gregory gave her a small nod, not out of forgiveness but acknowledgement. The kind of nod that says, "You did this. Live with it." She looked like she wanted to say something, but no words came out. Instead, she turned and went back inside. The door shut softly behind her. Harold came over later that day, carrying his usual six-pack. "You think that's the last we'll hear of her?" he asked, settling into the chair beside Gregory. "Probably not," Gregory replied. "But that's okay. I'm not fighting her anymore. I've got nothing left to prove. Harold chuckled. Man, you handled this whole thing better than anyone I've ever seen. I would have lost it. Gregory looked out toward the street, where kids were playing basketball near the cul-de-sac. If I'd lost it, I would have given her exactly what she wanted. Sometimes the best revenge is staying calm long enough for people to see who's really out of control. They sat in quiet for a while. The world outside was still watching, but here on Maplewood Drive, life was finally beginning to breathe again. That night, as Gregory turned off the porch light, he thought about everything that had happened. The fake officers, the public humiliation, the way Sandra's plan had crumbled under the weight of its own cruelty. But most of all, he thought about the lesson buried inside all of it. Authority, he realized, doesn't make a person powerful. Integrity does. Titles fade. Jobs change. Neighbors come and go. But how you treat people when you think no one's watching, that's what lasts. The doorbell camera had caught more than a crime that morning. It had caught a truth that echoed louder than any headline, that real strength isn't loud, and justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. When the porch light flickered off, Gregory stood and looked once more at the flag waving gently in the breeze. He wasn't angry anymore. He wasn't even proud. He was simply at peace. Because in the end, he hadn't just cleared his name, he'd reminded an entire neighborhood what accountability looks like. And maybe, just maybe, a few of them would think twice before mistaking silence for weakness again. If you've stayed with this story until now, remember this. Character isn't proven in comfort. It's proven in conflict. So when life tests your patience, keep your dignity close and your voice steady. That's how real change begins. Subscribe for more true stories that remind us who we are and who we should never become.